This is Jessica.
And this is Lewis.
We have a preschooler and a toddler. Our children are a different kind of perfect. This is a show about surviving parenthood throughout raising children with special needs, while keeping ourselves and our sanity intact. This is FUBAR, Surviving Parenthood with Special Needs Kids. Today we'll be introducing ourselves and our show and discussing the different terms for special needs, both positive and negative. Before we get started with our main topic today, I wanted to explain what our name means. So, Lewis, what exactly does FUBAR mean?
It's, as far as I know, a military acronym for Fucked Up Beyond All Recognition.
So, why FUBAR? Why in the world would we use this crazy military acronym? Well, when I think back to how I've been feeling and how we've been dealing with having two kids with special needs. We got them diagnosed roughly around the same time. It's been a lot. So this term does not mean that our children are in any way messed up, but it really goes back to how I'm feeling. I feel like I'm messed up beyond all recognition. I am not exactly the person that I used to be. I'm not functioning the way that I used to be. I'm not able to do the things that I used to do. And I really don't recognize myself anymore. I'm just not the same person. So that's really why I wanted to name it FUBAR, to show that, we're different. This is a really, really trying time and a trying life, and things are just different. So why do we start this podcast? There are tons of podcasts out there, both in parenting, and there are some with special needs. But there's really nothing like this. The goal really for this podcast is to start a community of people who are parenting kids who have special needs, really of any type. Our kids have autism, ADHD, and perinatal stroke, but this is really for parents or family members or really anyone who has a relationship with kids who have different needs, to kind of come together, have a community, and have a non-judgmental space to talk about what's going on. There's a lot of advice shows out there. There's a lot of resources, good or bad. We'll talk about that in another show. But there's really nothing to just kind of be yourself, get your stuff out there. Everyone I've seen has been really just saying, okay, this is what you do. Well, what about when you've tried all those things and none of that has worked? How do you get through that? What do you do? What about when there's no time, when there's no money to do these things? Well, then what do we do? So that's really why we wanted to start this podcast, and hopefully it also throws some humor into the situation, because it's such a tough situation, and there's just so much, and there's so little time to do anything, but there also are really funny parts too, so we wanted to bring humor into this really trying time.
And yeah, we basically want people to know that you're not alone. Other people are going through a different but similar trying situation, and sometimes it's good to know that other people are going through something similar and difficult as well.
I know I felt really isolated recently, and like no one understands, no one gets it, or maybe even just no one cares. And I've been looking for support. I've been looking for just that network of people, and I haven't really found it. So I figured if I need that, then I'm sure other people do too. So that's really why we wanted to start this podcast. So Lewis, what does special needs mean? What is kind of the dictionary definition of special needs?
Well, from what I understand, a special needs child is a youth who has been determined to require special attention and specific necessities that other children do not.
So why are we talking about the term special needs? There is so much, I guess what I would call hullabaloo in the media, in blogs, all over the place about the term special needs. Do people like it? Do people not? Is it really characterizing what these kids are going through? Is it a pejorative term? It's really tough. And there's so much misinformation out there. There are a lot of really awful terms, really just negative terms that people still use to this day. It's not the 30s anymore. It's not the 50s anymore. And we're still using these terrible terms. So I wanted to get out there, what these awful terms were, what is a sort of kind of consensus of what the more positive terms are, and really what we think about what those positive terms are. So first, I just wanted to read a list that I found of the bad terms for, like never, ever, ever use these terms. Cripple, dumb, feeble-minded, freak, idiot, imbecile, crazy, mentally handicapped, moron, retard, gimpy, maniac, disabled, spaz, incompetent, infirmed, impotent, weak, defective, and brain damaged. Holy cow. So, Lewis, what does that list make you think?
There's a lot of accusatory kind of feeling behind it. These things are children with special needs they didn't ask for this or anything like that. And so people using these words, it's very, not only you're not giving respect for a fellow human being who's, suffering from something, but you're putting them down. So it's very disgusting in that regard, how, you're treating them of such a lesser status than yourself, as though it's in their fault. And even if it was their fault, it would still be inappropriate. But as far as we can tell, a child is not born a certain way on purpose, caused by themselves.
Yeah, it just makes me feel like we're just name calling. We're throwing these terms at these people. They're not really people or kids. Nobody really cares about them. We're just kind of throwing them off into nowhere. And it also makes them sound like they can't do anything. They're no good. They're never going to get better. And that they're kind of worthless. I mean, cripple, that really implies they can't ever do anything ever. They're just totally, hate to say the word handicapped, but handicapped for the rest of their life and not able to do anything. And dumb, where does that even come from? These children are not dumb. They have different abilities. They learn at different rates, but it doesn't mean that they're dumb. They're all able to learn just in their own different way and potentially different thing.
And regarding things like the word cripple, these words are implying these people are in a status where they contribute to anything, or they can't live a decent life. And I mean, that's just not true. I mean, we saw the other day, we were at a basically it's a zoo, and we saw someone who obviously was suffering from some condition that was affecting their ability to couldn't walk. Regardless, I mean, this young woman seemed to be having a blast. She was on an electric wheelchair and just flying through, and she was smiling and just kind of giggling as she went by. And it's like, wow, that's fantastic. Listen, she's having a blast. And it's like, wow, okay, so she doesn't have the ability to use her legs and that, and it really didn't matter.
And it looked like she was having a grand old time, especially since she was beating her sister down the hill, and her sister was running and trying her very best to beat the older sister, and the sister in the wheelchair was giggling and having the time of her life because there was no way in heck that the younger sister was going to beat her. So it was a really cool situation, and to say any of these words about her would be terrible. She's not a cripple. She was getting around. She was doing everything that she wanted to do. Her legs weren't able to walk her where she needed to go, but she was still able to go where she needed to go and do what she wanted to do. And it seemed like live a really full life. So I think that's important to think about. And, when we use this language, it's important to think about what it actually means. Again, things like imbecile, idiot, assumes that these people can't do anything.
Yeah, exactly. These labels try to force people into these categories that are static and changing, and it really is a shame because it doesn't allow for people can grow and develop, even suffering from certain conditions. And to just put these labels on them to other people kind of fixes them, oh, they're in an unchanging state, they're crazy, they're stupid, retard or something like that. It's oh, this is how they're always going to be. It's a very fixed kind of thing.
And the term retard, it's been used in such a negative way, and, it technically means slow. And by slow, it doesn't mean that you are necessarily mentally slow, but you might be slower to grasp certain concepts, but that doesn't mean that you can't. There are some children or adults who won't be able to grasp certain concepts at certain times, but they may be able to, and with time, they may be able to. So to just throw those terms around are awful. And I also wanted to talk about crazy and spaz. I hate these terms because think about a child who has autism who might start screaming all of a sudden or flapping their hands. They're not a spaz. They're doing it to calm themselves down. Either they're scared, or they need more sensory input, or they're overwhelmed, or they just need a way to calm their body down. It doesn't mean they're a spaz. We might not do the same things, but we may not have the same needs that they do, or the same impulses, or things might not bother bother us the same way or be as overwhelming in the same way. But we all have ways of self-care and to take care of whatever these things are that are going on. They're just maybe not as outwardly visible. It doesn't mean that they're a spaz or that we're not a spaz. It just means that we have different ways of doing things. I also hate infirmed because, again, that means they're sick. There's no way they can get better, that they always need all the care, all the doctors, and they might need more care and they might need more doctors, but it doesn't mean they're necessarily sick and weak. That implies, maybe they're mentally weak or morally weak or physically weak. But think about how strong these kids are to be living in this able-bodied world and to find a way to survive and hopefully thrive. That's not weak. That is incredibly strong.
Oh yeah, wholeheartedly. I agree. That's way stronger than any person who was born neurotypical or with 4 limbs that function perfectly or a brain that operates, in a certain way. They barely had to try compared to, these individuals.
And then there are the terms like disabled or brain damaged, where potentially there could be a positive connotation, maybe not. Brain damaged, maybe not so much, but, you can think about brain damaged where things hopefully will get better or there's an injury. I kind of, being a neuropsychologist, I think, how is this going to help someone? Because of my job, I tend to put labels on things as a way to communicate with other people. So I wouldn't necessarily call someone brain damaged, but I would say they do have brain damage as a way to say, okay, something happened to this person. It affected their brain, but hopefully things will improve. Hopefully things will get better.
Right. Yeah, just saying someone has brain damage, there's nothing wrong with that because it's just a statement of like, yeah, we're looking at the imaging. Yeah, the individual has injury at this site, yada, yada. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just when you start to use these terms to kind of identify someone's entire being as part of it, that's when it kind of is crossing a line.
And going back to disabled, unfortunately, with speaking with the medical professions or getting services or dealing with the government, sometimes we have to use that terminology because that's what they decided is the terminology that needs to be used. Is it the right thing? Probably not, but that's what they have. So, for instance, in order to qualify for disability or sometimes Social Security, like Social Security disability or Medicaid or medical assistance, you have to be technically qualified as disabled sometimes or a lot of the time. Or if you need a handicap tag, you have to be documented as disabled. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're disabled in every way, but it's a way of getting the services you need. So I don't necessarily agree that we should be using the term disabled, but it's a way to communicate, okay, there is an issue and we need to assist this person and get them the services they need. I hate that it's that way, but unfortunately, it's important kind of you use that term to get the people what they need. So we could really go on forever about all those things and how offensive all those terms are, but it's time to move on. So what are I would call them alternative terms for those bad terms. There's a lot of disagreement as to what is a good term, what is an acceptable term. So I decided to just throw all that out the window and call it an alternative term because there's never going to be a consensus. So what I really only found 4 that are potentially deemed acceptable. So one is differently abled, one is a different kind of perfect, that's my personal favorite, special needs, and having a disability. And I want to put out there before we have a conversation about these 4 terms, the reason our podcast has special needs in the title, whereas that may unfortunately offend some people, and that was by all means not our intent, but it's a way to find us. It's a common way to communicate. These children have different needs or other things that they need assistance with. So I really wanted to make it a common language so everyone knows this is the place to go to get that support and to find this community. So not everyone may like that term, not everyone may agree with that term, and I totally get it. But it was important that we had a name that was common language that everyone understood so they could find this community. So out of all these, Lewis, which ones do you like? Which ones would you prefer to use?
For me, special needs was always, I guess for myself, I never really thought of it as in a negative way per se. I always thought that was a kind of like a nicer way of kind of relaying the information of like, all right, so this is the kind of category we're talking about. Whereas it seems like using the words like, with the disability and things of that are a little little harsher, maybe terms per se. I'm not sure if I'm just being overly sensitive about it or something like that, but I don't know. So I would lean towards something like special needs until like there's for me at least a better phrase or something to describe it, and so be it. But to me, that's the best out of those four.
So think back to when you were in middle school or high school, when there were kids in your school who had, for lack of a better term for the moment, a disability. What were those kids called?
I'm sure people probably use the word cripple or disabled much, but to be honest, I don't really have a whole lot of distinct memories of what people would call them. I mean, I have experience in seeing them and everything. We had, several individuals throughout our classes who had some kind of some issues going on and everything. I don't really recall people saying something behind their backs per se.
So we definitely did have terms. The most common were, unfortunately, retard, SPED kids, so SPED, special education, and people who went on the short bus. They are all incredibly offensive, but that's what that's what they called them. And I think as kids, at least for the SPED part, we didn't really know any better, and we didn't have better terms. We didn't have other terms. We didn't have the education from teachers or parents or friends as to what to label these kids. No one ever even talked about any of it. There was just this classroom that other kids went that we never came in contact with that were these different kids, and we just assumed these were the bad kids, the disruptive kids, the kids we wanted out of our class. We had no idea. No one ever said, this is what they're here for. These kids have different needs. These kids are having trouble or need different education or better educate, whatever it was. They never talked about it. It was just this thing like, look in the other direction, don't talk about it, don't deal with it. It's not you. It's almost like it was something that was catching or contagious. Did you have anything like that in school?
I'm not sure. I mean, I certainly was uneasy around certain kids who, like those who, that Downs or some other type of condition or something. I'm thinking probably just because of a lack of education or something like that. I guess I didn't really know how to feel. So, I mean, I'm just being honest, like, sure, I actually felt very uncomfortable around special needs individuals and, somewhat scared or never really, never offended or anything like that, but more of like on a fear base, which, I'd say it's a shame, but I'm just being honest about how I remember feeling at that time, but definitely in sorrow towards them. No one really ever gave me any guidance on how to interact with these people or anything, which is a shame.
And I think that's a huge problem, and I'm hoping that things are better now. Our kids are very young, so we really don't know, but I'm hoping there's better education about that now. I know, the people who were in those special education classes in my school and high school, they had the disruptive behaviors and intellectual disabilities. ADHD was rampant everywhere in our school, so that was normal. That wasn't looked down upon or thought of differently. But I do recall specifically two kids who were in my class in high school who had what used to be called Asperger's syndrome and is now high-functioning autism. And we knew something was different about them than us, but we didn't quite know what, and not everyone had that language, and we just didn't know what to do. They were socially different, and we didn't really know how to interact with them, and those kids got bullied and picked on so much because they talked differently, they interacted differently, and I guess it's a good thing that they didn't always really realize or pick up on the social cues from other people that they were being made fun of, because it was all the time. And I guess in a way that's a blessing that the kids don't realize it. And I feel like I can say that because our older son, Benji, has high-functioning autism, and he doesn't really get when other kids are looking at him funny or when other kids are avoiding him or not talking to him because they think he's different. He doesn't realize. And at least right now, I feel like it's a blessing, because it would shatter my heart to a zillion pieces if he realized that someone was being mean to him or ignoring him or not liking him because he had autism. So thank God for that at this point.
And it's, it's a difficult thing because with the lack of education, it's a shame we kids don't sometimes show enough compassion towards others.
Very much agreed. Kids are awful. I remember the best friend that I had through elementary, middle, and high school. In retrospect, I do believe that she had high-functioning autism, and she had kind of darkish red hair, and it was very, very curly, and they didn't like her because she wasn't acting like they did socially. She was considered the outcast, and because of that, they they gave her the lovely term, the lovely name Curly Crap. And that is what they called her all throughout elementary and middle school, is Curly Crap.
Wow, what a fucking assholes.
Yeah, they all did. They all did. And they would come up to me and ask me all the time, why are you friends with her? Why are you friends with her? She's so weird. And she was different, but she was very likable. She was my best friend for a really long time. And it's okay that she was not like everyone else socially, but they were just so cruel to her because of it.
Wow. Yeah, that's holy shit.
And I just don't understand, the teachers had to have heard. They never did anything. All they did was they paired me and her together. I was incredibly shy as a kid, like very, very painfully shy. So they paired us together because we were the two outcasts and no one else would talk to us. So we were now friends for the foreseeable future. And the kids were just so cruel. And to pick her hair of all things, I mean, first of all, why make fun of her at all? If you don't like her, don't talk to her. Go make your other friends, leave her be. But to call her Curly Crap because of her hair was just unbelievable to me. So anyway, going back to terms that we like, I know there's a lot of dissension out there everywhere on the internet about what these terms are. In the psychological community, in the rehab community, they're looking at person-centered language of using the person first. So saying the person has a disability or they had an injury or an individual with autism instead of saying somebody's autistic or this autistic guy. So I like that. I do think that it really puts a lot of pressure on people to think about every single word before they speak, which honestly we should all be doing. But it's really sometimes difficult. Personally, I like the term special needs. And the reason why, and Lewis, I haven't told you this is kind of selfish. The reason why is, to be honest, I am stressed. I am overwhelmed, and special needs, when I refer to my kids as having special needs, honestly, I need that recognition that this is really hard. This is the hardest thing I've ever been through. We have therapy after therapy after therapy and evaluation and this, and it never ends. It's a daily, every second thing. And using the term special needs gets me that validation that there is something going on. This is actually legitimately hard. It is not just hard in my head. It is actually difficult. So, I talk with friends, the baby Alex, who has, they really strongly think he had a perinatal stroke. He's getting better. He will likely have a very good outcome, which I'm thrilled about. But some of my even closest friends are like, well, does he even have special needs? Would you even consider him to have special needs? And to me, that's incredibly invalidating, saying, well, you're just overblowing all this. He's fine. Don't think about it. You shouldn't be so stressed. And I am so stressed. And I feel like there's no other way to get recognition that I'm stressed. I'm borderline having a nervous breakdown. So honestly, that's why I like that term. And I know that's incredibly selfish. That's kind of where I am right now.
No, I understand what you're saying. It really does kind of, when we first started using that term to refer to, our kids, like at times when describing certain things, it really does kind of put that perspective, and you're like, oh, that's why everything's so difficult. I seriously, it didn't really, at least for myself, didn't really hit me until you first used the term. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, and I've really needed that validation from other people, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever it is, that it is really hard. I'm seeing a psychotherapist right now because, good Lord, this is hard. And through work, I have a life coach, and they have to remind me repeatedly, this is actually hard. You're so stressed, you're on the verge of a nervous breakdown, because this is actually legitimately hard. It's not just all in your head. And that's been really helpful to hear, because sometimes I think I must be overblowing this. This must be easier, and maybe there's just something wrong with me that I can't cope. So now I'd like to move on to our next segment, which is fails, nails, and comical tales. And now it's time for fails, nails, and comical tales. So I'll start this week as far as fails. So this happened a while ago, but it was somewhere along the lines of saying to Benji, our 3.5-year-old, finish your chocolate or you won't get any dinner. No idea how that happened or where, but I was asking him to eat his chocolate. He wouldn't eat it. And I'm like, you're not getting your dinner if you don't eat your chocolate.
Yeah, mine was just, I have to watch my language sometimes, as all of us parents need to. And I forget what I was doing exactly. I think I forgot something, and I realized it when I was driving in the car, and I referred to myself as a knucklehead, which Could have been, shitbag or fucktard or something like that, as horrible as those words are. But I did not use those terms. I used knucklehead, which was good because he heard it and he thought that was the funniest thing and started to refer to himself as a knucklehead. He's like, I'm a knucklehead too. And I'm like, no, it's okay. What's a knucklehead? Are you a knucklehead? And it just kind of went from there. And I'm like I tried not to feed it, but yeah, it's too late.
Now we're on to nails. So I'm going to go into this story in a few episodes because it was a really big issue for us, but we had a pediatrician for the kids for a while. We moved to where we're living now about a year and a half ago, and there were just so many red flags that this was just not the guy for us. He'd had great reviews, blah, 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 wasn't right for us. So I finally gave in and got the kids a new pediatrician. I took Benji to the pediatrician on Monday, and I'm taking Alex to the pediatrician in a couple weeks when his next checkup is. So super big nail because the kids will actually get the help that they need from a proper pediatrician.
The nail I got was finally I found something that the boy would actually eat, and these Red Baron mini deep dish pizzas. He pretty much ate the whole thing for dinner, and I was very surprised because usually he just kind of browses on the food. And
this is a kid who lives on Pediasure and key lime Chobani yogurt, so this was a big nail.
Yeah, he is a big fan of that Chobani key lime yogurt.
On to comical tales. I need to do 2 this week. So the first one was my phone broke and I got a new phone, and I have an iPhone 10. And about a year and a half ago, we'd exposed Benji to Animojis, and he thought it was awesome. So he hadn't seen it in a long time, and I brought it up, I think, yesterday morning. And he loved it. He loved making the faces and saying the things, but he thought he turned into an Animoji. So when he was seeing himself as a unicorn, he would start patting the front of his head looking for the horn, or, feeling for all the things. If he was a skeleton, he was looking to feel the bones, or he was looking to see if he could feel through himself if he was a ghost. And he just had this puzzled look on his face, like, but I see it. Where is it? And when he was the poop emoji, he's like, why am I a poop? He just didn't understand that he didn't actually turn into a poop. And it was just the greatest thing ever. The other story that I just need to share is the baby, Alex, is learning to talk. And he says a lot of things that are words, and he says a lot of things that sound like words and may or may not actually be. He's just too young to tell us. So he was playing with me and Benji, and all of a sudden he said, shit! And Benji looked at me all concerned. He's like, Mommy, why did he say shit? I just started laughing and laughing. And first of all, I don't know how the big one knows what that word means. But we both heard it, so that must have been what the baby said. But it was pretty great.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. So Benji, when I've been introducing him to insects and everything and bugs, and trying to make sure he's comfortable with them and everything, because I'm really into insects and different things in nature. So I was trying to share that with him. And so, as we all know, mosquitoes like to bite people, including ourselves. So they had bit him a couple of times.
Just to let you know, he is very mosquito bite prone. He must be insanely delicious.
Yeah, I could say that again. And so he was just covered in little bite marks one time, and it happens so quickly, as I'm sure we all know. But I didn't want to say that they were eating him or anything. And so I'm like, oh, mosquitoes, look, they gave you kisses all over you. And then he just looked at me. He was just like, oh, that's so nice. And it was so, honestly, he was so happy about it. And I'm just like, sure, yeah, until you get yellow fever or something, God forbid.
Yeah, and there was one day when Lewis was driving Benji to school, and he just wanted to hold the mosquitoes, and they gave him 2 mosquito kisses on his face, and he was so happy because they were so nice. Last segment for today is self-care tip of the week.
Open my face. Why am I poop?
Now it's time for us to share a self-care hack of the week, where we share what helped us survive. Okay, Lewis, tell me, what self-care tool got you through this week?
For myself, self-care, this past week I was reading some ancient Chinese poetry from the Tao Te Ching. It's very nice and simple, but sometimes paradoxical kind of readings, but can give you depending how you want to read it, a sense of peace with the flow of everything.
So my self-care tip of the week is going to be very atypical, but I had to bring it up. So a couple weeks ago, we went to a county fair and they had the most amazing thing. They had a parakeet enclosure with like 30, 40 parakeets, and you got to bring in a stick of food, and you went in and they flew all over you. They would hang out on your arm and your head and your shoulder. And I am a huge animal lover, and it was absolutely the most delightful thing I'd ever experienced. So it's not necessarily something someone can just go out and do, or go out and buy 30 parakeets and be in this enclosure, but it was pretty awesome. Well, that's it for our show. Next week on FUBAR, we will discuss what signs we noticed in our kids, what led us to getting our children evaluated, and what the process was like for us. Spoiler alert, it was not easy. Well, that's it for our show. To find out more about the show, please go to www.fubarpod.com. Check us out on Facebook with our FUBAR Surviving Parenthood with Special Needs Kids group, and on Twitter at FUBARPod. If you like our show, please click on subscribe and help us out by giving us 5 stars on iTunes or wherever you find our podcasts. And leave us a review so other like-minded parents can find out what you like about us and discover their community in which to survive and thrive. See you next time on FUBAR, Surviving Parenthood with Special Needs Kids.